It's hard to believe that now it's been almost a half year since Wish came out, and I refuse to forget talking about it. But considering what forms the base of my channel and the evil of all villains and the developing times, it feels like there still remains much more to discuss. And wouldn't you believe it, but this entire thought spurred off from Inside Out 2's existence and me questioning the difference in qualities of storytelling between Pixar and Disney for such characters. And more importantly, in the case of villains, someone who performs their job really well without giving up entirely who they are. Because for the past 5 years or a little more, we've discussed how badly Disney has been shafting villains from their modern storytelling, or how most of their operations except live action ever even feature them at all. Until recently, from both studios of the films that have come out, show a contrast that was much needed but yet failed in the face of what they were trying to do, or succeeded if you see the other way around. The comparison in my mind of the failure of villain King Magnifico as this main focus of this entire video compared to what really succeeded better in Inside Out 2 with Anxiety, who really wasn't a villain. Now, because I'm bringing that up, you're probably confused to why the hell should I even be talking about that? What exact purpose does this apply to this video or anything I've mentioned a million times before? Well, the short answer is because the film is popular to do so and I've depleted myself of ideas, but also to show the truth that of something of a completed idea rather than an incomplete one. In this beginning part of the video, I would like us to pay attention to Anxiety from Inside Out 2. Where clearly by her actions, you can literally call her a villain, but also not at the same time. Moreover, a strong antagonist, or what I've shown before in Pixar's history as their anti-villains. One that clearly wants to work with the main protagonist that we all know and love, but turn that on their head the moment she finds out that they can't be together for what Riley needs in her future. Her definitions of what should be happening inside her view of the world. The over-planning and supposed control one might have to justify in a way that feels best. Opposite of Joy as that main hero who did things for Riley's happiness and her own life, but taking it a step further. Where I really want you to take away from all of this stuff I'm mentioning right here is the fact that Anxiety makes Inside Out 2 to what people love the most about it. The world and its actions surround her character completely to make the choices in the story that need to be made without feeling like it's something it's not. How Pixar can make something work in different ways than what you normally expect for a story and for a villainous character, for a sequel that is performing in several countries on a level not even seen since Avengers Endgame, which was a culmination and grand finale to that the world came to watch. Something similar that Wish wanted to claim to fame as an event with a plethora of references and the bulk of 100 years that preceded it, but ultimately didn't work in a box office failure. It's about understanding what you have in the beginning that justifies its end, and this problem that fully plagued Magnifico and every other character I have pulled apart back in Wish, and why this video is mainly focusing on why he failed the most as a villain in the definition of what they're supposed to mean to Disney. And if you might have seen this channel in the past, I immediately went straight to discussing this new villain problem with Magnifico after Wish release, knowing the same troubled history they had when they didn't have such villains at all in the previous films like Strange World, or villains who only appeared in the last 5 minutes of their films. Where it's hard to tell what the future of these types of villains would hold when other films like Moana 2 and the plethora of Disney's sequels that honestly didn't need major villains are being released yet again. The cycle of true disappointment for those who love this brand of characters with one who never knew or committed to being one villain. So when you go back to seeing someone like Anxiety going through the fully developed purpose of what that character's role is, you find yourself baffled even more that the sister studio of Walt Disney Animation produced someone like him, as a sympathetic king motivated to protect a kingdom of people with wishes into a monster that steals qualities from his past villainous members, all to gain for his own selfish nature. As you first begin to watch Wish, the story opens up to its backstory of his character somewhat, in the once upon a time image of a man who lived in a land that got destroyed by greedy thieves who sought to study magic to protect it to make it better, to make wishes a reality and find that anyone can be granted. So with his love of Amaya, he founded this kingdom of roses where he could use his powers of sorcery to fulfill the desires of the people that wanted to come while protecting them from any harm done, secluded from the evil forces that may be. And now moving forward in the story, we start with his desire to seek out an apprentice where Asha's character is allowed to come in, having two people with main motivations to make their kingdom better, granting those wishes anyone so desires. This is the baseline of wonder, forming the most powerful simple concept that connects all of Disney storytelling together in what most people want, to have their dreams come true. And having two people coincide with that is actually a great thing to do. but how it's going to be twisted in the ways it shouldn't be. So to recap in this short intro, is that we know he's already in a position of power, and that his power is made for justifiable reasons. You are learning something that is supposedly sympathizable to commit to any actions he might take away the deeper you dive into him. We see this when he first meets with Asha, knowing who her father is and was in his own dreams, relating to such loss with what happened as we explained to his family and the entire land. The reason everything in front of us actually does exist. But learning what that is where his character starts to fall apart. Not completely, as I'll say a bit later, but immediately how this part is to set up the dramatic shift to pull apart both hero and villain from each other instead of master and his apprentice coming together. When at all cost plays, you are actually getting this picture of what these characters want to do with the wishes, to protect them and care for them in what they shall be granted, until he says that not everyone will be granted when she asks for her grandfather's wish to be conveniently done during the ceremony. The whole plot of Wish revolves around this 100-year-old wanting to celebrate the gift of music like the company he was created for, but how specifically he cannot have this wish granted due to its vague nature, or more likely Magnifico's vague definitions.
Create what? A rebellious mob, perhaps? To inspire them to do what? Destroy Rosas, maybe?
Well, you're young, you don't know anything, really.
Whereas it is my responsibility to only grant the wishes I am sure are good for Rosas.
The explanation of I cannot grant something that is bad for the entire kingdom. The point being the truth that he keeps these wishes for himself, taking advantage of everyone who lives here to try to get what they desire the most, only for it to be forgotten until they get it back when it's granted each month or just for the rest of their life. A fact that nobody questions and is actually talked time and time again, even in the beginning song of Welcome to Rosas, with nobody asking why it's a bad thing.
But if they're not...
You've completely missed the point. People come here because they know they can't make their own dreams come true. The journey's too hard, it is too unfair. They give their wishes to me, willingly, and I make it so they forget their worries.
You make it so they forget the most beautiful part of themselves.
This is a fact that has to make you feel like Asha, where it's wrong for him to do so at all, revealing that he is a bad guy for actually doing these things because he's depriving people of the best that they could be. But how it's not actually justified at all when you think about it. Because when you slow down and process what he just said, you might wonder if he's actually right. Sure, he's doing something bad making people forget what they actually wanted, but he also brought up an interesting point that not all wishes can be granted. Some may harm what he built, going back to his own tragic backstory being too vague and irresponsible to do so. That you come in to know that most wishes people have vary in shapes and sizes and can either be good or bad if you don't know what it really means. But how that is just not enough to say what he really means that either justifies him in not granting Saba's wish based upon his fear and paranoia, hiding something that might be darker than it's supposed. This is where your mind becomes confused since you know he's supposed to be the villain but not realizing where that direction is headed. The idea of a traditional classic Disney villain bringing them to their roots but also a newer fresher take on the subject, combining between is this thing right or is this thing wrong, and what am I supposed to think, what is going on. I find myself struggling to balance any action to accept what is happening here since I don't have much information on what is supposed to make me go against him on Asha's side that won't grant this wish for some vague, unspecific reasons. I just don't understand why our main character cannot accept that not everyone should deserve to have their wish granted in the case that it does harm, other than to move forward to meeting a star that rocks the entire world apart. To have something to say that everyone deserves their own chance and compete for their own desires in life, but how everyone, again, is different that could be villainous in its nature or heroic on its other side. And when Star is introduced, it starts to change Magnifico because it's affecting all the wishes, which he wants to keep again but also play into this part that might make things worse on the end to protect them and the entire kingdom from destruction, pointing out with his wife again Amaya that he needs to stop what affected his own childhood.
Everything I do is to make sure that never happens again.
Again, this part reminds you that there is a reason to the madness, and if that breaks, who knows what the hell is going to happen. Which honestly, thinking about all of this in the first half that we just mentioned before the second, shouldn't have been the thought out point in the first place. At least it's a little bit better than the plan that Hans was actually taking in Frozen. And I say things like this for the reasons of justifying something that has to be done that Asha doesn't understand herself for all wishes rather than a darker turn that fits the real message of the kingdom and the people that deserve better. But then, this is where everything flips on its head within the song This Is the Things I Get, something I'm not really going to talk about since I've already covered before like everyone else, but more about talking about the villainous justification, the second half that changes a character from its first to whatever the hell the other one was. As demonstrated before this scene, he tries to go to the people for answers about this mysterious magic he wants to find that was probably done by a traitor, one that enters his fear and paranoia of his own self-control, one who wants to do it for himself that he thinks but is actually not because it's a different moment. But the moment you have him dive into the song later after telling everyone about this, things start to differ and the character completely collapses on its foot, deriving traits from other villains like Gaston as a selfish vain narcissist who cares nothing but himself. He glorifies himself to extreme in this entire song non-stop and forgets the other important aspects of himself that we just learned about in order to satisfy the complete second half, as you see this green magic swirl in the room as he uses the book to do so. And oh yeah, I forgot to mention the book again in this part. Mentioned early as a last resort to dark magic as he introduced with Asha as the thing he's not supposed to use that might make things worse. Reminded again and again by other characters like Amaya that he shouldn't use it because we don't know what's going to happen. Where you find out it's just a stupid plot device made to make Magnifico justified in the evil turn throughout the song, reaching that high peak where his anger and bad attitude shines, opening the dark corridors down below to just use a last resort for his own selfish control. I don't completely hate what the song was for it's on its own, but everything that came into its part together is just jumbled into a pile of crap. You start to notice this by how we completely forget about the developed motivations talked about in the very beginning into this mixed combination of other villains like Gaston, Jafar, Maleficent, Scar, or any of the other popular Disney villains that you could think of. The, message of evil that you see during the Halloween season or whatever Disney does with the characters these days. All he's doing is just meshing all of those bad traits into one, finding out where Asha was, crushing the dreams of our family. Like you're supposed to think, oh no, this guy is gaining more power, revealing his true identity, but the reality is more confusion to who the hell this guy is and why did he appear in the film just right now. This is where we talk about this again, circling back to the beginning of this very video and what I just mentioned with anxiety that played this part very well. Because there is a moment similar in tone to how bad things are twisted for the main heroes where the villain starts to take over or take something away from them. This clip right here showed a character very sorry that this had to happen but best to implement her very plan. All something that came in a little bit early in the story to commit to the plot where the heroes have to try to take it back. Whereas this, in the events of which, came much later in the film with a clear actual villain who wants to be evil, taking the power for himself, but now done in an unjustified manner by the way he changed to this point from a developed motivated standpoint. This is where I mention all the villains I highlighted specifically and which is deleted scenes and early villain development. And I'm doing this just to remind you, similar in the case of Pixar with a villain who really isn't a full-on villain either for what they're known for, but actually working the way that they all did. To mention all of these characters that worked and served their story from the very first moment they're introduced to the last moment they're defeated. First off, in this point, let's think about Jafar, who like Magnifico is a sorcerer with powers, or just sort of one with his staff as Grand Vizier to get what he wants. From the very beginning, you already know and see his attitude that is sly and evil, wanting to take control, and using this in secret with his own position, waiting for the moment to finally pounce when he gets it. This is the gradual descent into full-on villainy where you get this picture of his own qualities without taking anything away from it. His motivations are complete to who he is as a sly, selfish, narcissistic, sadist individual to get what he wants as Sultan, and the story works in that very way. Some characters are naive to it, and that completely works because he's able to charm them. In terms of Gaston, it's another narcissistic idiot who prides himself like the king in several moments of already being handsome, where he too also has power over the town in the first place, only aiming for the heart of Belle. It's more about the pursuit of something that is more beautiful than he is, and he wants that at all costs with his own brain-dead morals that everyone else in this village accepts completely. He doesn't waver from that even in certain cases where he just gradually reveals he is the true piece that never had this heart, but was able to perform what he was meant to do. In terms of characters like Scar, is another sly, cold, calculating lion who also becomes king, who wanted power but was passed on for it, waiting for the chance to rule and using his own brother's death to take over, all done methodically while everyone else thinks he's still that loving outcast. Or let's talk about Ursula, who I almost forgot to mention, a sea witch who wants to gain control over the 7 seas with King Triton's Triton and using Ariel and any other mermaid or merfolk she comes into contact with to get what she wants, manipulating situations to her advantage. That of course Magnifico also paid reference to very lazily in this one scene.
So much for true love! So much for for true love.
Very poor and doesn't fit his character at all, other than to say, hey, this is a 100-year-old film, this is a film we did before. And then, finally with Maleficent, was a fairy that was just petty not to be invited to Aurora's birth and decided to curse her for the hell of it with her own green devilish powers because she truly enjoys it. Her dominion and overall existence is all about spiting those beneath her for the fun of it all, and nothing had to be shifted over from any set motivation. All of these examples are villains that fit the mold of the pure evil aspect that Magnifico was trying to go for in this half, but with a better understandable background. It is justified from that very standpoint instead of one that had no business to dive into it unless it references to such classics being tributed towards. The problem that leads us to the infamous deleted scenes I've talked about before in the full review and also in the separate Amaya villain video. These were scenes that showcased scenarios of them being the dual villains plotting behind the scenes of the truth of what was happening for the wishes that they so desired. They had callbacks to original villainy with other traits and adding on to something unique that Disney never did before in the past. The other importance here in these scenes is that Magnifico rather uses alchemy as well and likes to consume magic in this bright yellow to eat to actually satisfy himself, similar to Star, used in a more power-hungry evil way that he likes to turn into a beast or something more. The level of frightening villain that was much needed for the film to be portrayed, but wasn't there, and actually a representation of the true aspects of his own character. The important thing I really want to mention about this here, or you to take away, is a character that fits the type of story more better than what I saw in this first half. Like I said, I don't find myself liking this foul sympathetic attitude they portrayed in the film for justifiable reasons of wanting to found Rosas, compared to preferring something akin to these deleted scenes of a man who lies to his people to keep the power for himself, granting wishes so he and Amaya can live such lavish lifestyles. Yes, he could have a tragic backstory that changed the fate, but it needs to be explained in a way that forces him gain all the power, that he realizes that he deserves it and not those greedy thieves. You know, aspects of what a true villain is all about, compared to what the hell this ever was in the first place. It is supposed to be a character that contradicts narratives and being beacons of pure evil against the challenge of a good-hearted hero who wants to do better. You know, similar to whatever his character was supposed to be in the second half when he descends into pure madness. This version of the character would fit better and more justified because it showed who he truly was inside. If we'd seen those scenes and seen him plotting to actually understand more, then it could have worked, instead of diving right into those aspects the second his villain song ends after the pain he went through explaining that he needs to do this to protect Rosas for some arbitrary reason and have Amaya as the logical point of view in his conscience. They needed to make sense of that dark turn. Like, look, I know you thought about having him was the best idea to be the main villain, but having her as a good character was also unnecessary and overbloated like the rest. Having way more than one character to realize what Asha was talking about other than her perspective just does not work if you want to gradually affect the kingdom into chaos because of what he did. Like, oh no, he used the book and now he's evil and not the man I used to love. Like, that doesn't make any sense. More like a low-tier, crappier versions of conscience that Jiminy Cricket was supposed to be but failed miserably on his own too, saying that this is who you're supposed to be, but then fully portraying that image because he used a damn book yet again, where one of the 7 dorks just decided to betray them for such shallow reasons, unexplained. However, again, this entire shift isn't completely unjustifiable if the explanations were better on the side of him being more selfish if he'd not referred to such dramatic events explained earlier. What if the reveal was more detailed in how it benefits his rule? What if it was like those deleted scenes in the very beginning that he was this way and his overall selfish nature that sustains that purpose rather than vague empty words or phrases to say that this is or that is. All statements that are moronically stupid to do so above all reason. But this is where I really have to stress that I don't think Magnifico is the worst Disney villain ever created. Far from it, where I think someone like this guy from this obscure 2013 Disney movie is still probably the worst, but how he just failed to be who he truly was meant for. Everyone who at least wants to praise the movie on something can agree with the fact that Magnifico is the most interesting character of the film, and Chris Pine still did a damn good job with what they were able to work with, but not enough to salvage a broken story and a broken character. If you demonstrate a kingdom that lives with peace and happiness, that most desires can be granted and no harm done to anyone at all, why exactly would you want to change that? What greater purpose is the main character trying to do that everyone seems alright with? Say compared to the plethora of deleted scenes that showcases a plot filled with other people who think the king actually does harm to him with their wishes in the first place, that he hides their hopes away from someone who takes them for themselves in seclusion. The pacing of this movie hindered any hope of these ideas happening since it either focuses on a big reference to Disney's past of just retrieving wishes where the king just appears appears out of nowhere where Star was while using Simon as a bait for Asha. These magical ideas of saying the hero's heist can work but it actually doesn't just is so stupid, and again is only explained from the damn book that probably accesses him to these powers. These surprises also do not work because they're done in this rapid fashion manner before you can even think or answer or comprehend whatever just happened. That this very moment towards the climax is just very painful to digest because it's the real moment you get to see everyone in the kingdom to see who the man truly was as his own monster. Because before that, when Asha and her friends were deemed traitors, most people did cheer on to get their wishes granted. We bring up this point since they were hammering in the point throughout the entire film that Amaya is where people start to realize what he's doing wrong. She is the focal point for the audience to learn that every single individual in the kingdom would know he's a bad person. But most people's faces, other than this one Simon moment probably, are not actually reacting in the way that she is feeling, since all of them are giving a chance to get a wish granted. They are not thinking too much because they are too stupid to do so, removing any hope of how such power can corrupt and tear a kingdom apart. Like moments that feature these difficult situations are perfect to set up things breaking apart since you're revealing the true extent of a villain. Thinking in terms of how Scar and how his rule actually broke everything, all the lions were angry at him, and the hyena started to question or slightly turn his back on him, culminating in this very ending, where you saw him in this one moment look at his subjects who are starting to question each other to break it apart, but how that actually went nowhere in particular, like Mr. Toad. Just plopping in plot holes here and there like there's no tomorrow. When you think of this part of his backstory, the reasoning behind keeping the wishes, the book of pure evil greenness, the people as a whole, and the ending of the film, all just don't make sense because there's no information to validate that. And the only solution to these problems were always hidden in those deleted scenes, where we question why were they even more better than the final product that was derived right here? What really happened with this film that was so bad for the studio? Because now the only thing that can be done is absolutely nothing, since he has absolute power for himself, with no hopes and dreams for everyone to do with a snap of his own fingers. His ultimate enemy is now just under his grasp with nothing that can actually be accomplished, since he has all the magic and everyone else has nothing, except for the eventual power of singing. And watching this again for the upteenth time is just so painfully dumb and the worst decision Disney has ever made in their entire history, since it tied back to the same meaning of everyone can be a star. Cause take a look back at all the other Disney villains and their deaths or defeats and notice something blatantly clear that the film does not even follow. Where yes, you have noticed that the fact remains is how villains are logically or passionately defeated by a hero without any music or singing involved, since it was an intense climactic battle that good defeats evil. Emotional moments where truth prevails out of all, or the spirit of an individual triumph. And yeah, those words might ring true for how the scene is performed in any way you can think of, but how it borders on parody instead, since everyone is singing a song they just happen to know the words to that Asha sang earlier, also playing in the part that they are somehow made of stars or stardust, likely to imply that triumphs of sorcerer's powers for some reason. Now, I will give up with one simple fact that something like this could have worked if the movie was longer to explain those plot holes to inspire what they were trying to do in hope and determination and the spirit of knowing what you can get rather than to give it away, but how it all just fails because it's just rushed to this point where it feels pointless to even do so. It just feels like a short answer to a complicated problem they presented themselves where their villain has all the power, where it instead all culminates him getting sucked in his own staff since their voices were just loud enough to express the fact that they were able to get what they want back, leaving us more confused to what the hell even just happened. Ending up with yet another stupid reference that he get locked inside a mirror and sent straight to the dungeon, becoming another idiotic theory that, oh, he might be the magic mirror on the wall, like Asha is the fairy godmother. More references, and nothing of substance. This villain is more of a concept of ideas not yet finished rather than a complete menacing foe that people come to expect in terms of a fairy tale movie. A Disney fairy tale movie to be exact. A chance to start fresh with a new story that ended up with a dud compared to the likes of a sequel released 8 months after from a sister studio that not everyone expected, that the entire world is embracing with open arms for its emotional appeal, rather than this film that nobody even desired to watch. The poor excuse again of 2023 being the 100 years of Disney turned into a dud, and how nothing of value was either gained or lost from it. You know, if they'd done that in the first place, finding out who he was from beginning to end compared to a divide of two different people with opposite personalities, then he would have been great. Having someone who already mastered his victory as his king and is able to manipulate an entire kingdom is still a good starting point, but how it's not enough if the facts are not there to justify any reasonable cause for that end goal. All villains are formed through an idea that makes the world different in their light and how they're able to impact an opposing view from a hero's journey. But how if that view is actually clear, presentable in its meaning that anyone can understand if you are a child with a vivid imagination or an adult discerning practical presentation, or whatever other words I can come out of my ass. For that you really cannot present something without committing to their explanations that transform and validate that very same plot. Whether you want to blame this on executive interference, AI level scripting, or any other thing that went wrong throughout the production, the real fact remains is how Disney is just in need of proper villainy. They cannot be balanced in between having none or having some at the end, and need it more in a thorough manner. That now you can look back on Magnifico and see a failure of the right intentions in the wrong hands. That the craft is purposefully handled in the very first part rather than the last, in the difference between something that is good compared to something that is great, or in the case of Wish, something that is mediocre to at least decent. Failure of this king does not mean the end of all things, but an encouragement to be better, to take away the right lessons to improve upon the idiotic mistakes of management that takes the beauty of collective imaginations for granted into a hodgepodge mess of crap, becoming what they so designed themselves, as he does represent those executive paths overall. With of course mentioning something that comes shortly after with what can be done in Pixar's success with a sequel like Inside Out 2. Again, something that was probably mute to tell to you guys, but yet a grand reminder that good is always there and you need to see it. The real details of what make characters and their stories shine, and why all of us can love it for their emotional, universal messages, rather than hate it for not being enough. Enough to the point where you can say, this is the things I get for loving villains? Well, I'll be damned if that's your answer and what you can produce, or hopefully we can move on from that with one success coming after another failure, and reminding us that this era should be all done with. And so am I. So goodbye.